All right. Well, hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. This is the Alaska Climate Adaptation Science Center's April Skill Building webinar. Today, we'll be hearing from experts in visual communication from the Anchorage Daily News, Hawkeye Magazine, and Hakai Institute on the importance of visual media and communicating research. We'll have time for questions after our three presentations, so if you can go ahead and hold them for afterwards, that would be great. Just use the chat if you have any problems with hearing us or seeing any of the slides shared. So first up, we're gonna have Mark Garrison, the art director from Hawkeye Magazine, which explores topics in science, society, and the environment from a coastal perspective. So I'll hand it over to you, Mark.
Hey, everybody. So I thought I'd start by introducing Hawkeye Magazine for those who aren't familiar and give a little bit of an overview of what I do, and then I'm gonna give some tips on better visuals for when you're in the field. So I'll just share my screen here. So Hakai Magazine is part of the Tula Foundation, which also runs the Hakai Institute, which Meg will tell you a little bit more about in a little bit here. It is a private charity that is based in British Columbia. They do research along the coast from, I believe, Meg, it's the Copper River to the Russian River. Is that what Eric likes to say is the purview of the Institute? So the magazine is editorially independent from the Institute, which means that we write about the world's coasts and nobody's telling us what to write. We do occasionally write about the work of the Hakai Institute because they do amazing things, but when we're doing that, it's because we think it's a great story, not because anyone's telling us that's what we need to do. My background personally is in graphic design. I come from a creative agency background, graphic design, websites, bit of photography, that sort of thing. And so now at the magazine as art director, my responsibility is all the visual aspects of the magazine. So that means picking photos, hiring photographers, the design of the website, coordinating with illustrators and data visualization specialists and other people who are contributing visually to the magazine. So when I am looking for a photo to go with the story in our magazine, I kind of look for three main things. I want something that's going to either engage the audience. So is it something that's going to draw someone in? Like, for example, this whale predation picture was from a story about how Salish Sea's killer whales had started to adopt this practice of beaching themselves to get prey. And this was really helpful at drawing people in because it's a really intense photo. Or we're looking for something that's going to enlighten the process for the readers. So because we're dealing with often complex science, things that our readers aren't necessarily familiar with themselves, looking for an image that's going to help the average reader understand exactly what's happening to enlighten them. Or an image that's going to help connect them to the characters or the place in the story. Those are sort of the three main things that we're looking for when we're trying to find images for our stories. So for a group of scientists who are out in the field, you're probably wondering how to best communicate your science. And as I understand, one of the main goals here is to help you understand how to provide good images for science communication, for pitching to magazines, for newspapers, etc. So I'm going to just go through a few tips on getting more engaging photos, some composition tips, and then I can pass it on to the other presenters. So one of the big things is get people's faces in the shot. It's something that often when we're in the field and we're busy just trying to get the science documented, we don't necessarily think about, but for the average reader, they want to know who this person is they're reading about. They want to understand that person a little bit better. So having the people's faces in shot and exposed properly is pretty helpful. Finding a unique angle can be pretty helpful too. So it's our habit, most people's habits when taking photos is to pick up the camera, point it at the thing you want to take a photo of and hit the shutter. But often if we can take a moment and view that object from a position that we don't normally view it in, that can create a more unique angle. So in this case, for the story about creating leather from fish skin, the photographer took a photo of this pair of boots that was made from fish skin, and by getting down low, she provided an angle that we normally wouldn't be viewing somebody wearing shoes from. Focus is hugely important in how we direct somebody's attention in a photograph. So in this case, the sea lion is in focus. We've got the foreground and the background are both blurred. If something important was in the foreground, like for example, a tool that they were using to rescue the sea lion, or the wire that had been wrapped around its neck, for example, and that was something you want to highlight, having that in focus and the sea lion out of focus would create a different story out of the same picture. Photography is all about light. It's the single most important thing in photos is lighting. And so paying attention to what time of day you're taking photos, what the weather's like, your location, it's going to make a big difference on the quality of photos that you get. Then moving into some composition tips, one of the most simple ones to follow is the rule of thirds. So if you take your frame and divide it into thirds, both vertically and horizontally, then typically speaking, having something run along one of these axes, or super important things being near the intersection of those axes, creates a pretty strong composition very easily. And in fact, a lot of cameras will allow you to overlay a grid like this on top of the screen while you're taking photos to help you with that composition. But if you're going to center, be deliberate about it. So this photo, I actually really, really love, partly because it's an incredibly sweet moment between this camel tender and this camel, but it is the arch of his back and his hands creates this circle in the middle of the photo. And by centering it, she was able to create this circle that draws us into the middle of this photo. And I feel really captured by it, because once you get in there, your attention it just stays within this circle. So it's quite powerful. Paying attention to foreground, middle ground, and background can make a huge difference for your composition. It creates depth in your photo. In this case, we've got a researcher right here in the foreground, got 3 more in the middle ground, and actually some in the background here too. So this, again, this story that this photo is telling could be quite different if this group here was in focus and not the researcher in front. Focal points are a big one. When I was in art school, I had a teacher who used to love to say that the strongest focal point in a painting is going to be where the lightest light meets the darkest dark. So the place of the greatest contrast. In this case, it's going to be right here on the diver, where the lighting from behind meets the silhouette of the diver. So the strongest focal point in a picture is where your eye will immediately be drawn. It's not always going to be a contrast of tone like that, of dark and light. Sometimes it might be color, for example. If you have a photo in the woods and everything's green and you're taking a picture of something yellow, that yellow object is going to stand out quite dramatically against all the green. So the place of greatest contrast becomes your first focal point. And typically speaking, your eye will travel in a hierarchy from the strongest focal point to some of the secondary focal points. So that's a way of leading a viewer through your photo, is by paying attention to what focal points are there. And getting rid of distracting objects is a big one, especially when you're taking photos in the field. Now, in this case, this photo was actually meant to highlight the garbage on this beach, but I often see with photos that are provided by researchers or by journalists that are out in the field who don't have a lot of photographic experience, it can be really easy to not notice small objects that are just kind of there. For example, if you're taking a picture of some researchers that are working out in the woods, as I just said about the focal points, if you've got all this green background and somebody's bright orange Nalgene bottle is at the corner of your frame, that's where everybody's eye is going to go, is right to that Nalgene bottle. So just taking a moment to look for distracting elements that don't contribute to the image and ultimately might distract from them. that is all I've got. So I'm going to pass it on to the next presenter.
Thanks, Mark. Those were some stunning images, and definitely things that I have made pitfalls in for sure in the field. So very helpful. Next, we're going to hear from Loren Holmes. Loren Holmes is a visual journalist who has worked with the Anchorage Daily News for 9 years, and I'll pass it over to him.
Hi, everybody. It was really nice to see some of Nathaniel Wilder's photos in that presentation. He and I went to high school together. I grew up in Anchorage, worked for ADN for 9 years. And a lot of what I'm going to say might be a little bit redundant, but I'll try and say it in a little different way. The biggest thing, the biggest piece of advice I could give you is to tell the human story of the people doing the work, or the human story of the impact of what you're studying. That helps make it accessible. It helps people care about something that can seem abstract to a lot of people. And when you're thinking about what to photograph, I like to think about it as verbs versus nouns. Like, nouns are important, they're really important to a story, but the verb is sometimes, the action is what's more exciting. So as a photographer, I'm looking for action a lot of the time. So when you're thinking about how to document what you're shooting, you can think about, first of all, like, what is the story about? Is it like write the headline, like try and distill what you're doing into like a sentence or two, and then from there you can branch out and sort of break it down into the pieces of the activities that are happening, the place that you're studying, things like that. So like if you are studying a glacier and you're and you have to take a helicopter to get there, show me the helicopter. Don't just show me the glacier. Don't just show me the snow. Take me there with you. If you're taking photos that you're hoping we might publish at the Anchorage Daily News, we're looking for authentic photos. We're looking for real situations. We don't want 10 photos of people smiling at the camera. I mean, we're looking for the real moments, the real candid situations. So think about it that way too. We also have an ethical responsibility to be the independent voice. So we will look at submitted photos, and we will, in the back of our mind, we're going to be thinking, is this a real situation? Is there anything about this that seems off or staged? And sometimes that's appropriate. Sometimes it's appropriate to stage something to explain something in a certain way, but we prefer the independent to be the independent voice, and to show something accurately, something that actually happened. Like for example, the beach photo. If there's that orange Nalgene bottle and you move it, that's we would question that's not accurate. You can reframe yourself, you can move the camera somewhere else, but don't just that's just something we're thinking about, and it may be a little you're in the field, that's your situation, that's your environment that you're manipulating, but that's just something that we're thinking about. We would prefer to take our own photos. So if you have a really cool project, the worst thing I like to see in my email is, hey, we did this great project this summer. Here's some photos that we took. When we could have been there with you and taken our own photos. Sometimes that's not possible, obviously. Logistically, that could be too challenging. But if we can be there with you seeing you do the work, then we provide that independent voice. We provide the expertise from the visual perspective, and it just makes for a better story in the end. And we will share that, through our newspaper, probably in a different way than we would if we were relying on photos that were submitted. I can answer a lot more questions, if you have specific questions. So maybe I'll pass it on now.
Thanks, Lauren. I think there are a few researchers that would be excited to hear that that's a thing that ADAN would be interested in, is hearing about those fieldwork opportunities for sure. Next up, we're going to have Meigan Henry. She is a video editor and producer with Hakai Institute, and formerly has worked with National Geographic and the Smithsonian as well. So hand it over to her.
I'm just going to share my screen. So you can see my first slide?
Not yet.
What are you seeing?
Just your video at the moment.
Let me try sharing the screen again. Sorry, guys.
No worries. There we go.
How's that? Okay,
Yep.
Great. Okay, so I wanted to start by just giving you a little bit of background on the Institute and myself. So Hakai Institute has been around for just over 10 years now, and we conduct long-term scientific research on the BC Central Coast. We're focused on the coastal margin, which for us means everything from mountaintop to ocean bottom. And we have a couple of research facilities, one on Calvert and one on Quadra Island. And then we also have offices in Vancouver and Victoria as well. I myself started off as an archaeologist. This is not me, but I couldn't dig up an old picture. But once I started doing archaeology, I quickly got frustrated by how the science was being portrayed to the general public. This is a lot of the stuff that I'd see out there. And so I ended up moving over into a program that turned scientists into filmmakers, into communicators. And from there, I worked at National Geographic and Smithsonian and now Hakai for the last 5 years. And during that whole time, I've primarily worked with researchers to help them tell their story, again, primarily through video. And video, I think, is an incredibly powerful tool. It allows you to speak to all kinds of different audiences in really interesting and engaging ways. And you can use it in all kinds of different contexts. You can use it on social, for your presentations, for grant reporting, media-rich press releases, for your lab website, for paper video abstracts. And frankly, you could use it for explaining to your parents what it is that you do. But before you decide, okay, I'm going to make a video, ask yourself if video really is the appropriate tool, the best tool you can use. So what is it exactly that you're trying to accomplish in communicating your science? And is video really going to help you get there? And who you're trying to talk to, and will they even watch video? For some people, they prefer something in print, or a photograph is going to do it for them, but video is maybe not the right way to reach them. So ask yourself some basic questions like that. But if you decide, yes, video is the way to go, take another look at, oh, sorry, I'm behind a slide. Take a look at your audience. Think about your audience, who they are, and where are they even going to watch this video? Are you making something for them to see on TikTok, or is this something that you're going to present to peers at a conference? And depending on how you answer that question, it's really going to inform the style and format of your video, the language that you use in it, and it may even change the focus of your video. For instance, depending on the level of understanding of your audience and do they even care about what you're talking about? Or is that something you have to convince them of? So answering some really basic questions about your audience is going to go a long way to helping you focus that video and how you're going to put it together. Another series of really important questions is all about your goals for the video. So people typically don't remember too many things when you talk to them. So, what are like the 3 big takeaways that you want them to walk away with? And why is it even important for people to know those things? Answering those kinds of questions will really help you focus the video. And it's going to save you a ton of time when you're creating that video. And it's going to give you a much better final product. Making these videos these days is really at everybody's fingertips. You don't need to have a bunch of expensive equipment and be getting out into all kinds of crazy places. Really, a smartphone can get you through the entire process. You can film the video with your smartphone. You can record voiceover with a memo app. You can edit your video and you can upload it to various platforms, all from your smartphone. So you really don't have to go out and spend a ton of money or get a bunch of gear that you don't know how to use. If you've got a little bit of money, you can always, buy some fun lenses to add on to your smartphone, or a mic, things like that. But that's not necessary. And really, the key is that, chances are when you're getting into your lab or when you're going out into the field, this is not what's waiting for you. You don't have a lot of people there ready to record everything, all those important moments and processes. So if you're not the one filming it, it could very well be a really big missed opportunity. So go out there and film, but plan ahead. Because when you're out in the field or when you're in the lab and you've got 20 different things to think about, there's too much going on to have that be the moment where you're starting to plan your video. So when you're still back at home, start thinking about things like shot lists. This is where you want to think about the who, what, where, why, when, and how of whatever you're trying to communicate or show. Who are the people who need to be on camera? What are the important locations and the processes or moments that are really important to capture? But beyond sort of like the basic content, you also want to be thinking about in these shot lists, you want to think about what we call good coverage. So you want to give yourself a lot of options when you go to edit the video. You want things like really nice, wide, establishing shots, those kinds of images that set the scene and provide context for the story that you're trying to tell, the science that you're trying to show. But you don't want everything to be wide shots because it's, very arm's length. You want to get in there and you want to shoot some of those details as well that really give you richness and a better understanding and allow you to really be over somebody's shoulder and there with them. Having said that, you also want those medium shots in there as well. You don't want everybody to be little tiny ants in these huge wide shots, but you also don't want just all thumbs, right? You want those sort of medium shots. And it's that combination of footage that helps you put together a really visually engaging video that allows you to tell a story. You can get really creative as you want, get all kinds of cool shots over the shoulder and things like that. But as Mark mentioned, don't forget about the faces. Somebody's face is going to be so much more engaging, so much more interesting than the back of somebody's head. So take the time to run around to the front and make sure you're getting those faces along the way. So you've got your shot list now. You've got all these different shots in mind. Still, before you go out into the field, though, you want to prep your gear. You may not have this package of gear going out with you. It might just be your smartphone. But still take the time before you go into the field or into your lab and make sure you know how to use the camera and that you know how to get some good audio out of it. You also want to do things like make sure your batteries are charged and that you have a way to charge your batteries when you're out in the field. that you've offloaded all of the 2,000 pictures of your puppy and the extra apps and all those things that are crowding up your phone, so that you've got lots of space to record things, and maybe even a way to offload media in the field so that you can record as much as you'd like while you're there. The other thing is, before you get into the field, try to wrangle somebody else who can help you film. It's going to be a whole lot easier if you have somebody who's a little bit more focused on the filming, and you can be focused on the science, or vice versa. But having a second set of hands for the filming is extremely helpful. The other thing to think about is just weather. Rain, snow, humidity, extreme heat, all these things can do a lot of damage on electronics. So just be thinking about that. Just, do I have an umbrella or something that I can throw over the camera and just make sure it's not getting wet? Cold will drain batteries faster. So just being aware of some of these things and thinking ahead of time will help you once you're in the field. So, okay, you've thought about all this, you've prepped, you are now headed into the field. So I've got a few shooting tips, just really, really quick things. Most of us, especially with our smartphones, the default is to go in and shoot something vertically. And if your video is headed towards like TikTok, maybe that's totally fine and appropriate. But if you want the footage to have as much opportunity to be used in a lot of different contexts, please shoot horizontally. Editors will love you. Media makers, journalists will love you. Also think about trying to keep your shots as steady as possible. So there are things like tripods and gorilla pods and things that you can use to try to help keep your camera steady. But even just, wedging your elbows into your ribs while you're holding the camera is going to go a long way to keeping your shot steady. Or if you're sitting down, propping your elbows up on your knees. Another thing is grab an old sock and fill it full of rice or beans or something and tie it off and use that to prop up your phone in a lot of different locations, just to give you a nice steady camera. Kind of along those lines too is just watch your focus. Autofocus can be a wonderful thing on any camera, but it also can be very problematic trying to focus on a lot of different things in frame. So again, just know your gear and know how it works and how to turn things like autofocus off when it's working against you. Another really, really important thing is getting good audio. It's amazing you can get away with pretty crummy footage if your audio is good. And so this is, can be really simple. Like if your lab mate is chewing on a very crunchy carrot or listening to music or on the phone or something, just asking them to be quiet goes a long way. Even just plugging in like those headphones that you get with your smartphone that have a mic, those go a long way if you're recording outside and it's windy, or you're in your lab and you've got the hood vent going, making a ton of noise. Just having some kind of even a basic microphone really helps to having great audio. And the last little tip is just a lot of us tend to shoot shots that are really, really short, and they might capture the action, but when you go to edit with them, it's too short. If you're trying to fade from another shot or something, you might overlap with the action that you want to showcase. So a good rule of thumb is making your shots about 10 seconds long. Go ahead, press the record button, get yourself settled nice and steady, and then start counting 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, up to 10, and then turn the camera off. And that's sort of a good length as a general rule of thumb. But more than anything, be safe. We have a tendency when we have a camera in front of us to focus on those few inches of screen, and we lose a sense of what's going on around us. So don't trip over a stool and fall into a vat of chemicals or off the edge of a cliff. Just be aware of your environment and be safe when you're filming. And last but not least, when you get home, it can be super duper tedious, but organize that media. It's going to save you a ton of time in the end, and it's going to make it a lot easier when a journalist comes knocking on your door 6 months later, or a year later when you've published the paper, and you can quickly go and get those clips from the field and pass it on. Part of that organization too is back it up. Make sure you have at least one other copy somewhere else, because inevitably a drive is going to fail or get dropped in the toilet, or something is going to happen to it. So just get that footage organized. So just to recap, video can be a super powerful tool, very accessible to everybody these days. So I would really encourage you to go for it. Just try it out. But just plan ahead. So have a clear idea of what you're doing and why you're doing it, who you're doing it for. Put together those shot lists, whether it's on paper or just in your head, and stay organized with your media afterwards. And then just those handful of things while you're out in the field, trying to shoot horizontal, stay steady and good focus, good audio, things like that. I covered a bunch of stuff. There's a ton of things I didn't cover. So I put together a list of resources that Molly is able to get out to you folks. It's far from exhaustive, but the idea is to just give you a few places to start if you want to learn more about video or editing or science communication more generally. Hear from some scientists who are doing this themselves, or just looking for a little bit of inspiration. Hopefully this is a helpful place to start. And that is it for me. So I will stop screen sharing.
Apologies, folks. It's uploading very slowly, this document I'm intending to share, but hopefully it'll make it there soon. But while I get that up, thanks, Megan. That was a lot of really helpful tips and considerations. I know for me personally that the organization after the fact is crucial and super hard for me to get my head around, because I don't know how much time I've spent searching for that one specific clip that I didn't label, but it's exactly what I need for another project. So that's a great point. We have plenty of time for question discussions with our great presenters now. So if folks have them, feel free to unmute yourself or use the chat. We'll keep both of those monitored. So feel free to ask away. Oh, thank you, Mike. Something while we're waiting for folks to get their questions together, I was curious about Megan, is how often when you're not able to be in the field that you receive images or video from researchers and work with that to produce something.
So I'm super lucky where I work alongside a whole bunch of researchers. And so our media team is constantly checking in with everybody throughout the year to find out what's going on, so that, as Loren was saying, we kind of know in advance and can try to get into the field with them if possible. But there's often so much going on, and sometimes in remote places or on a plane with only so many seats. And so we just can't be there. And so we're constantly using footage from researchers that they've taken in the field, photographs. It's all that stuff that, honestly, even if it's not 4K and gorgeous and amazing, it was that moment where they discovered something, or, or it was just them being in that experience that most of us will never have the chance to do. And it's that access that you all have being out in the field or in the lab that that we're trying to open that door and let others kind of into that world. So just the access that you have makes it extremely valuable media to use to tell those stories.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
So you talked about audio, but I'm curious, what's your take on using background music? How would one choose what would be appropriate kind of background sounds and music, especially if it's something that might be shown at a conference or something to an audience where you're not going to be having people talking about it, but you're just going to have it out there for information?
Yeah, music is great. Music is wonderful. It can tap into all kinds of emotions, and really, it's a great thing to use with video. There are various libraries that you can grab music from. A lot of them you'd have to pay for, but there are some free libraries. I know people who have also reached out to musicians and just said, hey, I'm doing this thing. Could I please use, this song and include it in my video? And you'd be surprised at how often people say yes. You know, as long as you sort of give credit. Music is a wonderful thing to do. I would say don't record music in the footage itself. It's something that you want to add in after the fact in the edit, because it's going to give you a lot more flexibility. I hope that answers your question.
I have a question for Loren. So you mentioned that ADN is interested in like coming and actually taking photos of researchers doing cool things. And I'm wondering if that is only for research in Anchorage, or if there are instances where, you know, a journalist might want to come into the field with somebody who's going to a more rural site.
We would love to come wherever you are. I know about 5 or 6 years ago, we had a photographer on a research boat, and he was there for a couple of weeks, the Tiglak. So something like that would be amazing if we can do it. Obviously, we have other obligations that we have to tend to, but if we can plan ahead and if it's logistically possible, you know, the more interesting the location, you know, sometimes that's just a better story. But one consideration is that we and many journalists, we want to pay our own way. So if you're chartering a plane to go somewhere, we would like to pay, you know, for our seat. And, you know, sometimes that's possible and sometimes not. But places on the road system or close to it are great. You know, in Bethel or Nome or, you know, some hub community where it's easy to get in and out on a commercial flight, that makes it a lot easier. I know we've done some stuff even at base camp on Denali. So yes, we want to come out to the more interesting places wherever they are, if we can.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I actually never even occurred to me that that would be a possibility. So kind of mind blown right here.
Yeah, and if we can tag along with another project, you know, like if you're doing something in Bethel and there's another story we have going on in Bethel, that makes it easier for us. So if we can plan ahead, that can help a lot.
Just like logistically, what does plan ahead mean to you? Like months in advance, or?
I mean, we're pretty flexible. Obviously, we respond to news as it happens, but the more time we have to plan, the better, especially in the summer, because as you know, most things happen in the summer.
Kind of following up on that, Meigan and Loren, you both mentioned this. What would the process of that reach out look like if I'm initially emailing either someone to possibly do a story to come out and shoot either video or photo? What information do you need initially? Who would I reach out to? Do I reach out to the reporter specifically that I think might be interested, or would I reach out to the editor? Which of these is more appropriate? Just kind of curious.
I mean, I can talk a little bit. Loren, you probably have a better answer as a journalist. I don't know if you want to go first, and I can follow up with anything to add.
Sure. I think if you reach out to the reporter first, that might be the better avenue. I mean, you can read the paper, read the publication or the website, and see who's writing stories that are kind of in line with what you're doing, and then make the pitch to them directly. Because we get a lot of emails, so things get lost if it goes to an editor or a different general email. And when you're pitching it, talk about the things that are going to be happening, but also talk about why we should care and why our readers should care. So just be thinking about those things when you're making your pitch.
Sort of along those lines, I think, Mark, you can talk to this too. We'll get pitches at the magazine where it's clear that the person never looked at the magazine and doesn't have a clear understanding of what we try to cover. And so make sure that, sort of as Loren was talking about, read the publication, look at the journalist or whoever you're reaching out to, and make sure that it's a good fit. That's a good place to start.
I have a question for you, Mark, while others are thinking. I've noticed both in Hawkeye Magazine as well as just more broadly in science communication, kind of a increase in the overlap between science and art, and that uses visuals that have been drawn by artists and working with scientists to kind of combine those. And I'm just curious about your experience working with artists. I've noticed that's popped up a few times in Hakai as well. So
Yeah, in terms of art to communicate science specifically, we have never really contracted any. We've done some stories about people who work in that medium where they're creating artistic installations or paintings that are based on data. But we do use graphics, so art in a broader term as opposed to fine art, to communicate science all the time. And it's super helpful because a lot of people are just visual learners. And also some things are much easier to show than tell. It's very tricky sometimes to describe the shape or the process of something in the situations where you could just show them with a diagram quite quickly, or to highlight specific changes in data over time can sometimes, I can't speak for other people, but if somebody gives me a spew of numbers over the course of a sentence or a paragraph, it's like Charlie Brown's teacher. It's like, in 2004, it was wah, 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 wah. My brain just turns it off. So if I can have a visual that allows me to parse that information more quickly, that for me, that's much better.
So following up on that, does that principle that you're talking about of potentially including graphics, does that carry over to like news articles? Like, what is the preference there in terms of like having a photo or having a graphic? Because a lot of times those of us who are science communicators, we don't get to go into the field with our researchers either, and so they come home with some pretty bad photos. And so we've created graphics for things, and I'm never quite sure if that's something that is of interest for when I work with a newspaper.
Yeah, I would say that it's not so much a preference thing as what is most appropriate for the goals of that story and for what to communicate the information in that story. For us, we would normally, if we're given a graphic that somebody else has created, we would probably recreate it in-house just to match our house style so that it's consistent with other things that are in the magazine. But having that as a basis to go off of is super helpful.
Does that apply to like illustrations too?
For us, illustration is a little more fluid. We don't have a specific house style. We tend to try to match the illustration to the style of the article. Most of our articles are written by freelancers, and so we'll usually hire a freelance illustrator. In the case we want to use illustration, we'll hire a freelance illustrator that seems appropriate for the style of story, for the subject matter of the story, and go from there. Occasionally we'll do them in-house.
I'll just say that we do, at ADN, we prefer to recreate graphics in our own style. You give us the Excel file with the data and we'll recreate it. And as far as like computer graphics or renderings, like we don't have the ability to do that ourselves. So we would run something, if you have this data that you've rendered into some animation, that's something we would include if it makes sense for the story.
Is it ever helpful? I mean, like I create a lot of our graphics. Is it ever helpful in the case of an instance where you wouldn't be able to recreate it for me to like let them know that I could recreate it in your style if you tell me what fonts and colors you wanted to use? Is that something that would be helpful or just not even relevant?
for us, we have a graphic designer who, I mean, that's his job, so he would do that. So, but for another publication like a smaller newspaper that doesn't have one, that may be helpful. But I can't really speak to that too much.
I would say for us, we have a bit of a different angle than newspaper because we are online only. So interactivity and motion are something we can incorporate. So in some situations where it might be, say, a data visualization in R or something like that, or an animation based on data that we don't have as somebody with that program or skill set in-house, then certainly that could be very helpful for us.
I would just add that in general, we sometimes come across bits and pieces that won't make it into a video or an article or something, but they still can be useful snippets of visuals that we can use in like social media platforms to promote the publication. Sort of additional rich content that we can add in. So it's just something else to keep in mind.
So I have a question. You may have intimated that there are a lot of science communicators in the room who are, taking photo or building graphics or whatever. But we also have some folks here who are primarily researchers and are interfacing and interacting with our science communicators. And so I'm kind of understanding there's three scenarios. There's a scenario in which the science communicator is shooting video, shooting photos. There's a scenario in which the researcher is the one doing it because we can't get out there, funding, logistics, whatever it is. But the other scenario that I'm kind of curious for you all to speak to is when you're shooting alongside a researcher, but you don't understand the work as deeply as they do, obviously. What are your tips to both us as science communicators when we're communicating with the researchers who are almost acting as like director, right? They know what's about to happen. They know what the next steps in the research process are. And I don't. What have been your best experiences or pitfalls to avoid falling into when you are working to tell someone what the shots that are needed are, or when something interesting is going to come about? When has that been a really fruitful collaboration between yourself and a researcher, and when has it been less successful that you might be able to avoid?
I mean, I guess for me, I try to have to do as much research ahead of time as possible. So that's like Google searches and reading papers and books and watching other videos and all that kind of stuff to try to understand the science better and the sort of bigger picture context. But it's also just spending time with that researcher before going into the field and talking to them through all this. So talking to them about their research, what that bigger context is, exactly what's going to be happening when we're in the field and why, what some possible outcomes might be, so that I can anticipate, if this happens, how do I cover it, versus if that happens, how do I cover it? And understanding from them, what is it that they love about this science? What are they excited about this field trip? So again, so that I'm thinking about ways to try to capture that and to convey that through the video. Mostly, it's really helpful to. I'm super lucky. I get to work with an incredibly talented videographers. And often they're going out to the field, and so I'm sending them with these shot lists and all this prep work to try to get what's in my head into their head. But things are always going sideways in the field, right? Things are always changing. And so ideally, I love it if I can be in the field as well, so that I can pivot. And now that I have all that information and those conversations, that I can quickly make decisions to make sure I'm still getting everything I need. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but a whole lot of research and talking to people in advance is what I'd say.
Lauren, I don't know if you had comments because you've probably spent more time in the field than I have, but One comment I would say is that you can kind of think about, it might be helpful to imagine somebody you know who is not super science literate but is intelligent, and how would you explain this to them, and what elements would be much easier to show them rather than tell them. Those would be the things that are going to be important to make sure that the photographer or videographer can capture in the process.
Yeah, as much research as we can do ahead of time before we're in the field is helpful, like Meigan said. And just having, yeah, the ability to like explain it to me like I'm a fifth grader. Like some things are not gonna really translate to a fifth grade level, but if you can try, then that is gonna distill it down to a level where the visuals might be more apparent.
There's always also ways that you can try to capture stuff after the fact, you know, if you weren't able to get that shot, or maybe the way to explain it is still visual, but you couldn't get it on camera, and so you use animation to try to, as effectively, clearly as possible, communicate an idea or a yeah. So sometimes you're sort of pivoting after the fact and trying to make it work. But one thing I find super important is having a clear idea in my mind about, why does this matter to somebody walking down the street? Having a really clear understanding of that myself, so that no matter what happens in the field, that's still kind of a big driving force behind what we're capturing in the field, and making sure that we're able to convey that in the final visuals, whatever they may be.
To that end, I'll just make a comment. This is slightly off topic, but Loren mentioned earlier about when you were contacting a journalist or an outlet, about making sure you are communicating to them why it's important. And just an additional point is that at the magazine, we often have a discussion about why is it important to tell it now, not just why is this specific bit of science relevant in this specific point in history, but also where in the process of this science is this appropriate to send into reporting. Is it interesting because it is something that's ongoing and we won't know for 10 years what the actual results are going to be? Or is it something where if we wait another 6 months, we will be able to know the results and report on them? Or is it too late? We found out the results 6 months ago, and by the time we finish writing the story, it'll be old news. So timeliness is something that we are definitely very aware of when we're reviewing pitches.
And another little point along that line, I put together a video at some point looking at the work of some archaeologists 5 years after they started filming. They had been filming for 5 years before anybody did something with that media. So, but having access to that process, what happened over the 5 years, so that when they got to the end of it, and we were at that point, as Mark said, where we could tell the story, we had everything we needed, all the visuals to go from A to Z. So, you know, get in there and start collecting those visuals right at the beginning. That's really important.
I had one further question. We have obviously a lot of really interesting field work going on, but I'm curious sorry for the dogs in the background, for our researchers who aren't often in the field, or most of their work is mainly, you know, in a lab or computer modeling or involving meetings that just don't have as obvious visual elements to them, but might be able to still tell a story visually if you've dealt with that, and how you've been able to kind of tell that story that's not as obvious.
I could talk a little bit about that. If you answer the question, why, like, who does this impact? What is this story about, and who is impacted by the research that you're doing? We may be able to take that and find our own angle to tell that story. Like climate change. Who is impacted by climate change? You may be studying something in the in a lab or looking at data on a computer, but we can take that and find a community that's been impacted by that and tell that story ourselves. But we have to understand what you're studying first. So you can start a conversation with us, with a reporter, and it may bear fruit, months later or even years later. But we're not going to know about what you're doing unless you don't reach out and just start that conversation. Because it's not just about what you're doing, but it's about the impact of your research that we might find interesting, and that may help get your research, get more eyeballs on your research.
I would say too that there are a lot of tools out there these days, and a lot of ways that you can visualize things that don't require a photograph or footage. Infographics and different sort of data visualization and animation are all ways that you can get really creative. And I know some researchers who have a talent for stop motion filmmaking and or are great with Illustrator and have gone in and made all these microscopic critters that you're not going to be able to film, but they were able to put it together and create some visuals that way. So there's often a way to visualize even if you can't capture it on camera. And there are a lot of like art students and things you might be able to reach out to if you yourself don't have those talents. Reach out to other folks who might be looking for some experience and would love to collaborate on something like that.
We've probably got time for one more question if anyone has a final question for these folks. All right, well, thank you very much to our presenters. It was really helpful to hear your perspectives, and thanks to everyone for joining. We'll be uploading this to our YouTube account for any folks that want to rewatch it later or share it. I'll make sure the link is shared so you can find it there. Thanks
Thank you all
all.
so much.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks.